You know, somebody should cue the Willie Nelson, because we are on the road again. This time, I got two stops. I'm on my way to Oklahoma first. I'm going to the grand opening of the new Neal and Brownlee spot. Neal and Brownlee is a hunt booking agency. My buddy Trey Sparing is one of the partners in it, and he's a great dude. So I'm gonna make sure I stop and support him. And then after that, I'm on my way to Texas for a handful of days. I got to stop in Dallas and then go to Houston, and I'm going down to see some of my Pack Mule Apex clients. They get to see me in person at least a couple times per year. So I'm going down to work with them, and so I got about another 7 hours and 23 minutes in the truck today. So we're doing another on the road podcast. Instead of asking for questions this time around, though, I went and looked at like common questions on hunting forums when it comes to fitness, especially this time of year. So it's May 20th when I'm recording this. And so I was looking at, what kind of questions people typically ask in late May, late spring, early summer. And a lot of questions about rucking, pairing rucking with strength training, pairing rucking with strength training and other aspects of conditioning. So I'm gonna work through that today. That's what we're gonna talk about. We'll talk about just rucking stuff, higher level stuff, and then integrating it and getting specific with other aspects of training and how to do that successfully and how to think about it. And so I'm planning on doing some more of these podcasts where I went and looked at common questions that a lot of people have, because I know sometimes people just, you don't want to raise your hand, or you feel silly asking a question. You shouldn't feel silly asking a question, but that way, a lot of people get their questions answered, because these are all kind of common themes, And so we'll start off with some of the higher level rucking stuff, as far as weight, weight restrictions for one, and then kind of what creates the most progress when it comes to rucking, and then we'll move into the other stuff. So first of all, what we know is from the research that you start really building efficiency with rucking when you ruck with about 20% of your body weight in your pack, because it's enough load for your body to really have to adapt to it. That said, I don't think everybody should just jump into 20% of their body weight, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with rucking. We also know that if you get in on the north end of 30% consistently, you start to see diminishing returns. So that means, your gait starts to change, you start to get less efficient, your breathing patterns start to change, and all of that kind of leads to problems, but also joint breakdown and things like that. You just get more wear and tear. Apart from 30%, which is specific to the person, we also know that, about 50 pounds is about the maximum load you want to consistently carry. No matter if you have that you're packing in for a long hunt, and you're walking in with 70 pounds on your back or 60 pounds on your back or whatever it might be, and hell, you're going elk hunting, and you're going to be carrying 80 to 100 pound loads on the way out. Consistency with lighter weights is where you need to be, because if you think you let the anxiety or the fear of having to carry a heavier pack out drive you to make poor decisions and ruck too heavy all the time, you don't need to do that. So, and then the other big thing that's going to move the needle more than anything else is just volume. It's just time under your pack, developing your aerobic system, and moving under load, so you get efficient. You get where your pack sits on your body dialed in, and maybe that's something I should cover real quick. The biggest thing with loading your pack, whether you're rucking, whether you're backpack hunting, whether you're just going for a backpack trip, is you want the weight centered in the middle of your back, and you want it tight to your spine. So, a lot of times people start to have back and hip issues and even shoulder issues. It's because they have the weight sitting too low, and that's pulling them too far back into extension. So when you arch your back like this, that's spinal extension. And if you spend a lot of time there, you're going to start to have issues. first of all, you're just not going to move as efficiently. You're not going to breathe as efficiently because you can't get enough air into your lungs, and it's also more difficult to exhale. And then, just that arch in your low back, it's going to cause problems in your back, but your hips are also going to take stress that they shouldn't take, and that's when you start to end up with hip issues and stuff like that. So apart from having the right weight in your pack, the biggest thing is making sure you load it well. I use my hunting pack, and I have a great meat hauler in it, and the great thing about this meat hauler is it's set up so that the weight sits in the middle of your back. And then I got these like Yes for All plates off of Amazon, and they're from China, and I don't feel great about that, but anyway, they're not very expensive, which makes sense, and they're thin, and so I put, if I'm going to do a 50-pounder, I put 2 25-pound plates in and just cinch it down in my meat hauler, and that works really well to keep the weight in the center, in the middle of my back, and then tight to my spine. So I can avoid all of those problems that I just mentioned to you, and finding a similar system for yourself would be a really good thing. And so, as far as how much, one of the questions was how much weight should I be carrying right now, and that really depends on the person and your progression with rucking. I would say as a standard, you should be efficient with 20% of your body weight at this point in the year. For most people, depends on where you start. If you're a little behind that, that's okay. There's still time to make it up. But for most, it would be good to be efficient with 20% of your body weight. And then how do you know that you're efficient? Our 3-mile ruck assessment is a great baseline for that. And so what we want to see is a person able to ruck with 20% of their body weight on flat ground for 3 miles in 45 minutes or less while staying mostly in zone 2. If you can do that, you're efficient under load, your aerobic system's in a decent place, and those are the two things that we're really looking for. So you should, if you're around this time of year, you should definitely be able to hit that standard. And then once you hit that standard, you should be able to maintain it. We take breaks from rucking. I'll get into that later in this show, but at this point in the year, you should be able to do that. Now, we don't start off there at the beginning of the year. Some people are fine to just jump back into 20% of body weight, but typically at the early points of the year, we start with 15, we build volume, and then we work back up to heavier weights. So that gives us a chance to reacclimate to just having weight on our body in that way. Is it necessarily going to build maximum efficiency? No, but it's starting that process, and it's just like anything else. You don't jump in with super heavy squats when you first start. You work on getting back into squatting, you get your legs to adapt, you get your form dialed back in, and then you start to slowly increase the weight. And this kind of coincides with why you don't need to pack heavy all the time to be ready for heavy pack-ins and pack-outs, because there's something called supercompensation. And so your body adapts beyond the stressor that you give it, so that the next time you experience that stressor, it doesn't cost as many resources. It's just not as hard. So for example, let's say, we use lifting as an example. Let's say you're bench pressing with 80% of your body weight, and you're doing, or not 80% of your body weight, just 80% of your 1 rep max, which is something that we don't really use, but I'm just using it for example's sake. Say you're doing sets of 3 with 80% of your 1 rep max, and you do a cycle of that. Your 1 rep max will improve even though you didn't go at or above your 1 rep max, because your body adapts beyond what you give it. If you give it proper recovery, sleep, water, rest, and nutrition, so that it just you don't have to allocate as many resources next time you experience that stressor. So, and that's because that's what your body's set up to do, right? Like our body's set up to survive. It's the same thing. You're introducing a threat to your body so that it can adapt and grow stronger. It's the same thing. And so, rucking works the same way. So you can start with around 15%. And some people, if you're honest with yourself and you're not in very good shape and you haven't been rucking, sometimes starting even as low as 10% is a good idea for some people. And then what you want to do is build volume. volume is going to be the most important thing. So build volume over time, and then as you start, that starts to get easy, then you start to increase the weight. So volume first, and then you toggle the other variables. The other variables would be the incline or the terrain you're on, and then weight, right? And so then you toggle those back and forth. I wrote an article that I'll link in the show notes. It's about prepping for a sheep hunt in the Northwest Territories, because I've trained a handful of guys to do that, and it's so I wrote out a really detailed article about it. Now, even if you're not going to the Northwest Territories to hunt sheep, or you never plan to, there's a rucking progression in there that lays all of this out. You know, starting with light, progressing incline, and then progressing weight. And so volume's going to be your biggest thing. As that starts to get easy, you know your heart rate stays down, your pace increases, and you start to notice that, then increase incline or increase weight. And it depends on your goals, it depends on your hunt, it depends on where you're at, and it also depends on what you have access to, how you would toggle those variables. So there's a little bit of individual variance in there, as there is with everything, but that's how you would approach it. And then once you get to 20% of your body weight, you can manage that for a lot of stuff. Now, what we need to look at then, especially is this time of year, is longer duration sessions. So if you're going to go out and ruck for 90 minutes, 2 hours, something like that, and you've been doing 45 to 60 minute rucks with 20% of your body weight, don't just jump in with 20% of your body weight and go for that longer ruck. Walk it back down to 15% for one or two of those rucks to get acclimated to that amount of time being under load, and then walk the weight back up. And the same goes with terrain. You know, if you've been rucking mostly on flat ground, and now you're going to go get on the incline treadmill, or you're going to go out into the mountains and ruck, bump the weight back down for a session or two, and then start to work it back up. That way you give your body a chance to adapt, and you don't beat the absolute piss out of yourself. So that would be two of the things that you want to be able to do. And then, you know, right when you hit that 20% of your body weight, maybe even up to 25, which would be, you know, for a 190, 200 pound person is going to be around 50 pounds. Then you can kind of start to live there and move there. But, you know, the big thing here is really to pay attention to your pace. Like, if you're going out and trying to smoke yourself with it all the time, not only are you going to beat yourself up, but just the energy cost is going to be really high, and it's going to be really difficult to recover from. And so that's why, you know, I like using heart rate parameters and different measures. You know, how do your legs feel? Do your legs feel just tired, or are they starting to burn? You know, can you talk when you're going, when you're moving? All of those kind of things. You want to pay attention to all that so you don't smoke yourself on those longer sessions, because we want to mostly, you know, stay in zone 1 and zone 2 with those. And as you get good at rucking, with 20% of your body weight, moving at a good clip, it's going to get hard for you to get into zone 2. And that's one of the places that, especially for people that don't have access to train a lot, that's where we start to institute some easy running. Because if you drop down the volume of your rucking at that point, but increase the volume of some light running, you'll start to see your rucking improve. And I've never seen it work in the opposite direction, really. Like, if someone's good at good at running, rucking doesn't often make you better at running. It can help with crossover gait. So if you're one of those people that kind of crosses your knee across the midline when you run, you know, rucking can strengthen the outside of your hips to improve your form. But apart from that, it's not going to make you that much faster of a runner on flat ground. So we'll start to institute that, and then you see your rucking efficiency and your rucking time start to your rucking speed start to increase, and your rucking time start to decrease, because the rate at which you have to generate energy aerobically increases, because of, you know, your pace is going to be a little bit faster, and then also the reactivity of running, your foot's striking the ground, having to gather force and then send you forward, also helps, because it just makes you better to absorb the forces when you're under the weight of your pack. So those things work. And then when we look at getting into heavier packs and acclimating to that, we do a couple things to do that. But your conditioning and your time under your pack needs to be in the right place before you do some of the stuff that I'm about to tell you about. So, in the late off-season phase, we've been doing some high-intensity continuous step up. So high-intensity continuous training is a strength endurance and muscular endurance method that targets your fast twitch muscle fibers. And so essentially what you do is you do 1 to 2 reps of an exercise that's relatively heavy, every somewhere between 4 and 20 seconds, depending on the exercise that you're using. So this it gives you the rate of work, trains your fast twitch muscle fibers aerobically, but the pace, keeping the slower pace, keeps it from your anaerobic system kicking in too much. But then also the heavier weight, you need a little bit of weight to be able to recruit fast twitch muscle fibers, because there's something called the size principle. So the size principle says essentially that you're going to recruit the lowest threshold muscle fibers first, which would be slow twitch muscle fibers, and then you'll recruit type 2A fibers, which would be like your middle of the road fibers, and then you recruit type 2X fibers. And so you need the weight, and you need to execute the reps with intent, like you want to move snappy in the rep to also help recruit fast twitch muscle fibers. But the way that we've been doing it, we did them earlier in the late off-season training block. We pre-fatigued the legs first, and so we did some slow twitch, we did some slow eccentric split squats to build some fatigue. So we wouldn't have to use as much weight during HICT to get the training effect that we wanted, but also to start to build some fatigue resistance in our legs before we got into longer rucks, heavier rucks, things like that in the summer. Now, during the preseason, in I believe phase 2 from what I have it outlined, we'll do heavy high-intensity continuous step-up. So we'll start with fresh legs, but we'll use heavier weight, and depending on the person, it could get up to 40-45% of body weight. But the thing is, it's a very controlled environment. We're doing it in the gym, or somewhere, some people might do it at home. We're doing it just on a step up. We're stepping up, we're stepping down on a 12-inch box. This not only is going to build, strength endurance in our legs and muscular endurance, but it's also going to allow us to use heavier packs and acclimate in a safer environment. And we're not going to do that many sessions of it, like 3 or 4, which will be enough, because we don't get to get into that place where we're overtraining that. We're putting too much weight on our bodies, on our rucks over time. So a handful of sessions of that is plenty to get what you need. But then we also, starting in the first phase of the preseason, we'll be doing some heavier incline rucks into zone 3, and in some of that will go up to 25% of your body weight. For a lot of people that's going to be around 50 pounds. Some people it'll be lighter, but with the incline and the pace, your legs will get a lot of muscular endurance work, but you also get under a slightly heavier pack in some cases. And so both of those things start to acclimate you to heavier packs as well. And if you're doing that, and then you have consistent volume across, from earlier in the year, I think we really started rucking more consistently around March and April, which is fine, because you need a break sometimes from that kind of stuff, so you don't walk yourself into overuse injuries. You need to do some variations in your conditioning around the year so that your body gets different movements. Your brain is a cheapskate, so if you don't use something, it will lose it, because its whole goal is to save energy. Your brain wants to find resources, it wants to find threats, and it wants to conserve energy, all to keep you alive. Those are the brain's 3 main gigs. So we vary that up, and then we start our rucking progression to build up to what we'll do in the preseason to be prepared for season. And this works for all types of hunting. Whether you're an upland hunter and you're going to do a lot of walking throughout the season, whether you're just hunting pheasants in the Midwest, or you hunt chuckers and all the various species of upland game out west, it works for all of that. It works for backcountry hunters, it works for mountain hunters, all of that. That's where the individual variants based on need and fitness and all that kind of stuff is where you look at what the incline might be and all of that. That's where you pay attention to that. So that's really the high level stuff with rucking is, look at you want to be efficient with 20% of your body weight. 50 pounds is pretty much the cutoff for consistently rucking. If you're consistently rucking above 30% of your body weight, you're gonna start to have a bad time. It's not something that you want to do. And then again, volume is the most important thing, as it goes with most aspects of training, especially when it comes to aerobic training. Volume is going to be the biggest thing for you. So, and then we want to look at how do we marry all of this stuff together. We have rucking, we have strength training, we have our other modes of conditioning. How do we put that all together? And again, it comes down to individual variants, but I'll give you a basic template based on what we do, and it works. It's worked for a really long damn time. But to put it into context, you should train on a yearly cycle, and I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. You work on different things throughout the year, both because fitness happens in layers. There are certain things you need to develop before you develop other things, both so you can maximize the next step, but also so you're resilient enough to handle it. And so, for example, we do max strength training and aerobic work early in the year because that sets our foundation to be able to handle everything else. But then also our conditioning modes are far more general early in the year, both because, like I said, we need to have that variance in movement and doing different things and giving our bodies different things to adapt to. But also because you don't want to overuse different things. I mean, if you're a runner and you run all the time and you like to run, like, I'm not going to tell you not to run, but you will have specific things that start to happen if you run too much. And one of those things is, a lot of times your ankle mobility goes. I see it all the time. You see problems with hips. You see problems with backs. And so having individual variation in your conditioning is going to be important. So then we build the layers, right? So we layer efficiency on top of that. We start to ruck more. We get more specific as the summer moves on, and less of everything else and more towards the thing that we're actually going to be doing. And then in the fall, we maintain what we built throughout the rest of the year so we can go out and hunt, and it depends on your hunting schedule how you're going to approach this. But we start to introduce more general methods again. We start to lift heavier again because that strength maintenance throughout the season is going to be really important to help keep us healthy, but also to help our performance. And then we get back in and we start the cycle all over again. So the amount of days that we do different aspects of training changes throughout the year. But if for most general strength, aerobic development, and preparation for hunting, strength training 2 times per week, building in a ruck in there, and then general conditioning. Now, if you need to build efficiency under your ruck, or if you're getting closer to the season, you're gonna put your pack on a little bit more. And then you want to look at the actual cost of all of the different things that we're doing. So, for example, rucking for aerobic work is really, really good, but it also comes with a greater cost than things like going out for a hike or going out for a run and things like that, because you're carrying weight. Just the cost is higher. So sometimes those sessions, especially the long ones, are much harder to recover from. And so that's why some of the long sessions, it's often better to do something unloaded, especially at the beginning, to really build your conditioning, really build your body's ability to move for that duration and work in the longer stuff. And so, for example, in the first phase of the preseason program, which I'll do the whole how hunters should train in June podcast coming up soon, we're doing zone 3 work. Some people are, depending on their conditioning level, and I'm talking about backcountry ready mostly, we'll do 2 zone 3 sessions, 2 zone 3 uphill sessions to build the raw materials for later in the summer. And, then they can do a lighter ruck, and then the long workout I made loading optional. So just go out for a hike, go out for a run, do something like that. But we're going to start working into longer sessions, both because we need it for aerobic development, and the specific thing that we do as hunters is we move all day long. So we have to have the aerobic system that allows us to do that. And that's the balance that you have to look at is, how am I recovering from this? And what is the stress of the other aspects of training that I'm doing? So if you're in a training phase where you're doing heavier strength training and the volume's a little higher, you have to be careful with how much you're rucking so you don't give yourself too much, So, and then you have to look at how efficient are you under your pack right now. If you're not very efficient under your pack, you need to get under your pack, and frequency is going to matter. And so that frequency is what allows you to build the volume. So you might need to ruck 3 times per week to be able to build that efficiency. But then, if you want to get the total amount of volume in to really be able to move your aerobic system forward and develop your conditioning, you're likely going to have to do some unloaded stuff, because if you keep hammering it with rucking, you're going to dig yourself a hole and make it really difficult to recover. And it might feel fine in the moment, but 4, 6, 8 weeks it's going to catch up with you, and then you're going to wonder why the hell it happened, because it's not going to make any sense. But the problem started much earlier, and that's how it happens with a lot of injuries and stuff too, is like it comes out of nowhere. It didn't really come out of nowhere. You were giving yourself too much stress, or you were stressed out at work, or you weren't hydrated well enough most of the time, or you were eating like shit, or you were lifting with bad form and you weren't really paying attention to it, and then you end up with an issue. It's the same logic right there. So you have to pay attention to that kind of stuff. But then you just that's kind of where you find the balance, But if you're doing 2 strength days per week and 3 conditioning days per week, that's a really good template. And then you just have to fill in the variables of the different things that you work on throughout different times of the year. So we go from more like max strength to general strength endurance to specific strength endurance to just build strength training in the fall, and also building some max strength depending on someone's hunting schedule. How much intensity can they put into their lifts, and then we start the cycle over again. And then in there, like, the conditioning kind of layers in. But as far as rucking goes, it really comes down to how consistent have you been with the other things that you're doing. Because strength training is going to make you more resilient. That's one of the things that I think it's so important for hunters, because the things that we do beat your body up. We go out into the mountains, we walk on uneven terrain, we walk uphill and downhill, and if you're not strong enough to handle that, you're not going to perform very well, and your risk of injury definitely increases. It's also going to make you better at rucking because it increases your relative strength. So relative strength is your strength, how much strength you have relative to your body weight. So the best thing to do is to be somewhere in kind of one of those middle sizes, somewhere between like 165 to 195 pounds, and then be very strong at your body weight. Hit some strength standards that let you know you're where you need to be. And then if you have that, the cost of everything else goes down. So each step you take with your ruck on costs you less energy because you're working at a lower relative percentage of what you're capable of doing. And so that's why strength training is such an important part of preparation and to be under your pack. And so if you make yourself stronger as you get efficient under your pack, that's one of the reasons that you're able to carry heavier loads when it's time to hunt, because you have the frame to do it. You have the physical resiliency, you have the energetic efficiency, all those things start to blend. And then you layer how well you move on top of that. So that's why we focus so much on hip, ankle, and shoulder mobility. And then if someone has a deficit in one of those areas, we focus even more on it to make them better movers, both because it helps reduce the chance that they're going to hurt themselves, but also it saves you energy. And so that's where it all kind of layers in. And we work on mobility every time we train. And I think most people, most dudes for sure, should be doing some aspect of mobility training every day, because we tend to lose that more than women, because we're by nature just not as mobile. Women have more laxity in their joints, and that's where women have to work more on stability and strength. We typically have to work on the things that we don't like to do. So if you notice, women tend to bias themselves towards things that are stretchy. They like to do yoga, they like to stretch, they like to do things like that, whereas men, we just want to lift shit a lot of the times, and we have to train ourselves out of that. But the blend of all of that is going to be what's really, really important. So, if you're in a heavier strength phase and you're doing a lot of volume of strength training, you're probably going to have to watch your rucking volume. But if you're in that like normal kind of strength, working on strength endurance, and you've progressed, I think that's one of the most important things, is like you you can't just jump in and hammer yourself. And we like that idea, especially if we feel like we have to play catch up, but you can't really skip steps and expect the best outcome. You need to walk through the steps regardless of where you are in the year. You have to match what you're doing with your training with where you are fitness-wise. And you also have to pay attention to what else is going on in your life. You know, if you have a lot of shit going on in your work, there's a busy schedule with your family, and if you're just stressed out, like your body just can't handle as much, and that's something that you also have to pay attention to. And so one of the things you can do is look at, you know, your yearly schedule, and if you know there's parts that are going to be busy and stress are going to be higher, you have to pay attention to what your training's like at those times, because you're just going to sap your resources, you're not going to be able to recover, and you're going to dig yourself a hole, okay? But that's the general template, and then you fill in the amount of rucking based on your efficiency, based on whatever else you need to do, and based on the other training volume that you need to hit to be able to get to where you need to be to improve your endurance and to move everything forward, okay? So I think I handled those questions pretty well and got pretty in depth with them, so we're going to call it on this one. Again, I'm going to link that article in the show notes so you can see that rucking progression. And as always, I really appreciate you watching and listening, and I'm going to go back through some more of these forum questions and do some more Q&A podcasts like this to cover more general stuff so more people get the value out of it. And I'll be on the road here for, I don't know, almost another week, so expect another one of these with one of the good general questions I'm seeing on the forum. Again, thanks again for watching and listening, and I'll talk to you soon.